Hey guys. For any of you guys who follow my IG, just bought myself an early Christmas present from Barnes & Noble. I saw this book, and the theme, the title of it caught my eye, but also the width. It's a skinny little book. So we're going to be getting in the world history in bite-sized chunks very, very soon, but not today. I'm just using it as an avatar for information. They might come back, but I'm going to talk about James Cook. I keep wanting to call him James T. Cook, but that's my Star Trek talking. My affinity for Star Trek. Might be where they got the name, I don't know. Let's find out. Alright, I didn't know how long that would take, but it actually, James T. Kirk, the captain of the original Star Trek Enterprise. After Gene Roddenberry, the creator, rejecting other options like Hannibal, Timber, Flak, and Rangery, was inspired by Captain James Cook, whose journal entry, quote, ambition leads me farther away than any other man has before me, inspired the episode title. Or, where no man has gone before. Nice. Very cool. So, James Cook. Honestly, I have this book. Blue Latitudes. I've been meaning to read. It's about his voyages. And to me, that really is inspiring. I mean, the daring it would have taken to sail a ship all around the world, in the Arctic, in the Antarctic, in the 1700s, with sails, not even steam power, is frightening and inspiring at the same damn time. So, James Cook, I just want to make this a brief episode about it because, really, you might be able to hear it out there, or you might just be hearing Penny snore, but, there's, it's the end of November right now. There's a lot of crows in the past week or two that have come down to my area, and they sound like seagulls. And I thought, I was reading some of your comments the other day, and how you guys wanted me to do some more, marine, ocean-oriented videos. James Cook was a British explorer, navigator, cartographer, captain in the Royal Navy, the British Navy, back when the British was rapidly colonizing the world. They were definitely a naval superpower. And kind of close to home, you guys know I have a map video about Newfoundland. I have family up in Newfoundland, and that I learned about late in life, when I was 16 or 17, so my mom's from Canada. Some of her family are from Newfoundland, and it's beautiful. My dad loves going up there. He's from Miami, so he loves beating the heat and the humidity. And James Cook made detailed maps of Newfoundland prior to making 3 voyages to the Pacific Ocean, during which he achieved the first recorded European contact with the eastern coastline of Australia and the Hawaiian Islands, and the first recorded circumnavigation or circling of New Zealand. Yeah, these crows, they sound like seagulls. I came in here to do, well, I came in with an open mind, as I guess is characteristic of me. And I heard all these crows out there, and they sound so much like seagulls. I got inspired to do something along those lines. And we'll see how it works out, but they might just be annoying. You might just be hearing the Finding Nemo seagulls, mine, 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 out there, but maybe it adds to the aura. Who knows? We'll see how this video is received. So we're just going to briefly, after 20 minutes of me rambling, talk about a rough, very short biography of Cook, a couple interesting facts, and a very interesting death. So, yeah, sit back, relax. Let's find out about James Cook. So let the adventurous spirit take hold, and let me take you along for the ride through the 1700s. So we already said he was a very famous captain, filling with the spirit of adventure. Cook joined the British Merchant Navy as a teenager and joined the Royal Navy in 1755, so 20 years before the American Revolution. To put it into perspective, it's always useful. Let's go into his biography. So that was Wikipedia. This is, because you guys are always interested, which is awesome to me. I just never thought you guys cared about sources. But a few of you, quite a few of you are. So, we just jumped from Wikipedia. And Penny's snoring up in the bow there. She's snoozing in the captain's quarters. Sorry, I got lost for a minute trying to think of a pun about how Penny's the captain and I'm just the first mate taking over while she's taking a quick nap. Because when she wakes up, Lord knows, she will be barking out orders. God, she is loud, isn't she? We'll get those kibbles on hand, on deck, for when she wakes up. Let me shut the door real quick. Okay, hopefully that's a little better. So this is from the bbc.com.co.uk. Alright, let's open this up a bit. You'll see I try to add a little nautical theme in here. That's all I have right now. I think I have some fins in the closet, but I don't know how good that would, how much that would add to the ambience, the nautical theme. So, let's see. So, Cook. He was an 18th century explorer and navigator whose achievements in mapping the Pacific, New Zealand, and Australia radically changed Western perceptions of world geography. So let's let me zoom in here real quick. Okay. So as one of the very few men in the 18th century Navy to rise through the ranks, Cook was particularly sympathetic to the needs of ordinary sailors. James Cook, he was born in 1728 in a small village near Middlesbrough in Yorkshire. Yorkshire? I don't know how you Brits say that. Yorkshire. His father was a farm worker. At the age of 17, Cook moved to the coast, settling in Whitby and finding work with a coal merchant. In 1755, Cook enlisted in the Royal Navy, serving in North America, where he learned to survey and chart coastal waters. In 1769, and because at that time, see if I get a map here. British, North America was roughly divided into the British owning the north, and Canada in the east, probably Newfoundland too. The new American colonies were from Georgia to Maine, or no, I think the Brits. I think you guys ruled that too. Well, at least to New York, we know that. And then the French owned that huge tract of land that Jefferson purchased. Okay. So, yeah, hopefully you can see that. There we go. So, yeah, the British owned up here 13 U.S. prototypical colonies. The prototype of the U.S. was here. Spanish owned most of the Caribbean and I think South America too. And of course Mexico, they were very much influential there. And then this huge tract of land, basically the middle America, from west of the Appalachians to east, right up until the Rocky Mountains. And I'm not sure who owned over here, California and whatnot. And I know Russia laid claim to Alaska and western Canada. So anyways, Cook, and there's Newfoundland right there for any of you guys who weren't sure where the hell Newfoundland was, because it is pretty obscure. Pretty obscure little island. And it is about the size of Iceland and Ireland too, interestingly enough. Maybe I'll leave this out. We can reference it. Alright, so I just love giving perspective, and hopefully you guys aren't trying to take a crash course on James Cook, because I'm clearly not your guy for efficient transference of information about this guy here, especially with a stutter like that. So, Cook, 1755, when he was 17, so 48, no, when he was 27, about. So he enlisted in the Navy, and he was stationed in North America, where he learned to survey and chart coastal waters. So in 1769, so he's about 40 years old now, the planet Venus was due to pass in front of the sun, and which was a rare event, visible only in the southern hemisphere. This guy here. So. Interesting. The British government decided to send an expedition to observe this phenomenon. A more secret motive was to search for the fabled southern continent. Cook was chosen as commander of the Whitby-built HMS Endeavour. Those on board included astronomer Charles Green and botanist Joseph Banks. The Endeavour arrived in Tahiti in April 1769, where Green was able to observe the transit of Venus. Endeavour continued then on to New Zealand, and then sailed along the length of Australia's eastern coast. Wow, which at that time had never been seen by Europeans yet. And Cook claimed it for Britain and named it New South Wales. Cook and his crew then returned home, not arriving there until 2 years later in July. So in 1772, after they had gotten back from their initial exploration of Australia and New Zealand, Cook wasn't satisfied. So like I said, the theme of this channel is to find out kind of on the fly. I don't know about most of the stuff I'm looking up, so it's kind of a journey we're taking together here in this mysterious lost continent in the southern hemisphere that Cook wanted to find so badly caught my attention, so I looked it up. It's called Terra Australis. Terra meaning land, Australis meaning south. It's a hypothetical continent, first posited in antiquity, and which appeared on maps between the 15th and 18th centuries. The existence of Terra Australis, was not based on any actual survey or direct observation, but actually conjecture that the land masses of the northern hemisphere, most of the land exists above in the northern hemisphere, should be balanced by land in the south. This theory of balancing land has been documented as early as the 5th century, by Macrobius, who uses the term Australis on his maps. And it says during the 18th century, today's Australia was actually not mistaken for this southern continent, as it sometimes was. In the 20th century, Captain Cook and his contemporaries always referred to the whole of the 5th continent, or Australia, as New Holland, and to the imagined but still undiscovered 6th continent, today Antarctica, the southern continent, or Terra Australis, sometimes shortened to Australia, was sometimes shortened to Australia. In the 19th century, the colonial authorities in Sydney reallocated the name Australia to New Holland. So it wasn't until the 1800s that Australia became what it is, instead of it's originally named New Holland. And thereafter, the centuries-old Dutch name eventually disappeared, and for some 80 years, the South Polar Continent was nameless, until Antarctica was coined. Interesting. That's fascinating. How the hell could they have known? There was a southern continent. I mean, I guess maybe that's coincidence. Or maybe, if you guys look on the map, I mean, it's no wonder. I mean, that's inspiring. It's the sense of adventure and discovering something new that you could bring back. It's a very spiritual endeavor. It's very courageous to do that. But nonetheless, Africa down here, it's quite a big gap. And then even Australia, again, the gap between here and Antarctica is pretty big, even New Zealand. But if you look at South America, undoubtedly, because the stars shift, so you know how far south you're going, but you can't tell how far east and west you go because the Earth rotates. And I guess unless you keep a very precise clock on board, that it's pretty impossible to tell. But certainly they could tell, the explorers, that they were approaching the southern pole, I guess, based on knowing the overall diameter of the Earth, and therefore the circumference. So that would be my only guess, is how they actually knew. But of course, way up here, here compared to all the way up here where civilization started in the West, it's quite a distance. So how they had knowledge of that Antarctica is it's pretty interesting to me. Okay, back to James Cook. That was a pretty interesting little aside, I think. So in 1772 he wasn't satisfied, so he set out on our second voyage to look for the southern continent. So his two ships did sail close to the Antarctic coast, but were forced to turn back because of the cold. They visited New Zealand and Tahiti, and then returned to England 3 years later in 1775. And finally, Cook's third voyage was to find the Northwest Passage that was believed to link the Arctic with the Pacific. So that would be up here through, if you guys can see there. So naturally, they didn't want to have to go all the way. Of course, the Panama Canal was not yet built, so he didn't want to go all the way down around Cape Horn here to get to the Pacific. And naturally, they didn't even want to have to go to the southern hemisphere, so they tried to find, unsuccessfully, a passage through the Arctic waters of Canada. But of course, they would have had to navigate all the way around the northern border of Alaska, which, if you guys seen Into the Wild, it's not easy. Yeah, that linked the Atlantic to the Pacific, unable to find that fabled Arctic route from east to west North America. Cook then took 2 of his ships south and explored the islands of, around Cape Horn, around South America, and explored the islands of Hawaii. And at that point, that's pretty much where his story ends, in Hawaii. It's where he died, as happens to us all. But let's, before I get into that real quick, I wanted to actually go into this book, because I surprisingly found a little excerpt about Captain Cook. 1788, 18 years after Captain Cook's first landing in Australia, a fleet of British ships containing 759 convicts arrived at Botany Bay in Australia before establishing a settlement at Sydney Cove. Over the next 80 years, over 160,000 convicts were sent to the penal settlements of New South Wales. Van Diemen's Land, which was Tasmania, settled in 1803, in Western Australia, founded in 1829. Convicts formed the majority of the colony's population in the first few decades, although voluntary settlers began to arrive from the 1820s onward. So, and then separate colonies were actually formed out of New South Wales to become South Australia in 1836, Victoria in 1851, and Queensland in 1859. The indigenous Aborigine population, estimated at 750,000 to upwards to 1 million, actually, declined steeply, as you can imagine, over the next 150 years after the settlement. So, and yeah, their deaths were actually mainly just like the native North Americans, or Native Americans, I guess. Yeah, and their deaths were just like the Native Americans. So I guess were due to infectious diseases such as smallpox. Squatter settlements, particularly in eastern Australia, also led to violent conflict with the Aborigines. So yeah, I guess Europe, with our Black Plague and in our overcrowded cities. I say our, I'm American, but Europe, my descendants, I guess natural selection had already wiped out all of those humans that were susceptible to diseases such as the smallpox and bubonic plague, well before we had started settling and colonizing other areas of the world. So, very isolated groups, such as the natives in North America, I keep saying that, in America, North and South America, Australia, I'm sure plenty of people in the Philippines, Indonesia-ish, and other remote islands of the Indian Ocean. and such were very, very susceptible to those diseases because they've never been exposed to them before. So, and then gold rushes in the 1850s and 60s also led to a large influx of immigrants into Australia. Transportation of convicts ended in 1868 when the population had grown to 1 million and the colonies were able to support themselves without the need of convicts for labor, no doubt. So yeah, interestingly, 1868, which if it wasn't slavery, I'm sure it was at least indentured servitude of some sort, because there had to have been some way, some system by which the convicts could work to be freed. But 1868 is only 4 years after the Civil War in the Americas, so freeing slaves. So it's the connection around the world, around that decade, that generation was pretty interesting, that those two tied in together. And then, yeah, towards the end of that, Australia, those 6 colonies began to explore the idea of forming a federation as a nation. Okay, so that was a rough idea of a more rough biography of Cook's life. And now for the end of it. So in 1779, actually on February 14th of all days, Valentine's Day, Captain James Cook, the great English explorer and navigator, is murdered by natives of Hawaii during his 3rd visit to the Pacific Island group. So 11 years earlier, Cook, he was a surveyor, of course, one of his occupations for the Royal Navy, was commissioned a lieutenant in command of the Endeavour, the HMS Endeavour, to lead an expedition that took scientists to Tahiti to chart the course of the planet Venus, like we said. He returned to England, having explored the coast of New Zealand and Australia, having circumnavigated the globe, and beginning in 1772, he commanded a major mission in the South Pacific. Sorry, this is just a recounting real quick, I guess. This is on history.com right here. Discovered New Hebrides in New Caledonia. I'm not sure where that is. So, after all that, literally circumnavigating the globe for years, in 1778, a year before his death, he made the first visit to the Hawaiian Islands. He may have been the first European ever to visit that group, which, so he actually named the Hawaiian Islands the Sandwich Islands in honor of one of his patrons, John Montagu, the Earl of Sandwich, which I didn't realize was actually an area to be an earl of. Cook and his crew were welcomed by the Hawaiians, who were fascinated by the Europeans' ships and their use of iron. Cook, he provisioned his ships by trading the metal, and his sailors traded iron nails for sex, which I actually heard is something Columbus and the first Spanish explorers of the Caribbean did. The ships then made a brief stop in Hawaiians, forgive me for mispronouncing this, but it's Oahu, and headed north to look for the western end of the Northwest Passage, from the North Atlantic to the Pacific. Almost 1 year later, Cook's ships, his two ships, the Resolution and the Discovery, they returned to the Hawaiian Islands and found a safe harbor in Hawaii's Kealakekua Bay. Not bad, Kealakekua Bay. It's suspected that the Hawaiians attached religious significance to the first stay of the Europeans on their islands. And in Cook's second visit, there was no question of this phenomenon, because in Kealakekua Bay, that land, that area was considered sacred, a sacred harbor of Lono, the fertility god of the Hawaiians. And at the time of Cook's arrival there, originally, the locals were actually engaged in a festival dedicated to Lono. So Cook and his compatriots were welcomed as gods, and for the next month or so they exploited that Hawaiians' goodwill. And after one of the crewmen died, though, exposing the Europeans as mere mortals, relations appeared to become strained. On February 4th, 10 days before the infamous death of Captain Cook in 1779, the British ships sailed from Kealakekua Bay, but rough seas actually damaged them, and the foremast of the Resolution damaged the foremast. And after only a week at sea, they were forced to return to Hawaii. So now the Hawaiians greeted Cook with hurling rocks. And then they stole a small cutter vessel off the Discovery. And so then negotiations with King Kalaniʻōpuʻu for the return of the cutter collapsed after a lesser Hawaiian chief was shot to death, and a mob of Hawaiians descended on Cook's party. The captain and his men then fired on the angry Hawaiians, but they were soon overwhelmed, and only a few managed to escape to the safety of the Resolution. Captain Cook himself was killed by the mob. A few days later, the Englishmen retaliated by firing their cannons and muskets at the shore, killing some 30 Hawaiians. And the Resolution and Discovery actually made it back to England at that point. So kind of an inglorious death. So I'll leave you guys with a couple facts about James Cook. He joined the Royal Navy relatively late in his life. He worked on a Yorkshire farm in his youth before winning an apprenticeship with a merchant sailing company at 17. He cut his teeth as a mariner, figure of speech, which is actually a good one, on shipping voyages in the choppy waters of the North and Baltic seas, and spent the next decade rising through the ranks and mastering the art of navigation. He was being groomed to become a captain, but in 1755 he shocked his superiors by quitting his merchant sailing career and enlisted in the British Royal Navy as a common seaman. Cook was 26, far older than the new recruits, but it didn't take long for the Navy to recognize his talent. He was promoted to ship's master after only 2 years, and later became one of the first men in British naval history to rise through the enlisted ranks and take command of his own vessel. So, no doubt it was a culture of nepotism that he subverted and actually made his way by his merits. So it looks like, unfortunately, he was a victim of his own hubris in taking advantage of the local deities in Hawaii. I mean, no doubt he fell victim to his own pride. Literally portraying himself as a god. I mean, of course that was probably partly out of necessity for survival, but I'm sure there could have been some other routes that he might have taken to escape such a probably not too pleasant fate. He was an expert map maker. James Cook first rose to prominence as a cartographer during the 7 Years' War, which was a, 7 Years' War was a global conflict fought between 1756 and 1763. It involved every European great power at the time. It spanned 5 continents: Europe, the Americas, West Africa, India, and the Philippines. The conflict split Europe into 2 coalitions, led by the Kingdom of Great Britain, Prussia, Portugal, Hanover, and other small German states, and on the other side the Kingdom of France, including the Austrian-led Holy Roman Empire and the Russian Empire, Spain, and Sweden. See, that's why I love learning about history. It's like, the world wars, World War I, or the First World War, as I guess the Brits call it. That was just the reverberations of earlier battles across the world. It's not like we were all just living peacefully and then a world war happened. There's generations and of cyclical relations and falling outs, and no doubt a lot of it has to do with the bloodlines of the royalties and the royal families being mixed, and having some sort of personal petty squabbles and quarrels mixed in with land grabs and superficial spiritual rivalries. But yeah, that's so cool. And there it says, the war's extent has led some historians to call it World War Zero, similar in scale to the other world wars. Wow. And World War Zero, and this was before it ended. Well, it ended 10 years before the American Revolution. No doubt that was a big influence. So that, because the Americas undoubtedly didn't want any part in that. 20 years before the French Revolution, undoubtedly again, a lot of unnecessary French lives were probably lost in the 7 Years' War. So, it's just useful. It's really useful to be able to learn from history. And, so yeah, Cook was an expert map maker. He was a cartographer during the 7 Years' War, when his detailed charts of the St. Lawrence River helped the British pull off a surprise attack against the French-held Quebec. In the early 1760s, he was given the ship and tasked with the charting of the island of Newfoundland off the coast of Canada. The map he produced was so accurate that it was still in use in the 20th century. Cook's skill at charting the seas would later become a crucial tool to his explorer's arsenal. He won command of the first round-of-the-world voyage, in part because he could be trusted to navigate the uncharted territory and bring home precise information of the lands he discovered. Yeah, and this, probably going to be a reiteration of what we already talked about, but his first voyage included a secret mission from the British government. Cook's career as an explorer began on the Endeavour, nearly 100 crewmen in tow. Their journey was ostensibly a scientific expedition. They were charged with sailing to Tahiti to observe the transit of Venus. But Cook carried sealed orders instructing him to seek out the great southern continent, an undiscovered landmass that was believed to lurk somewhere near the bottom of the globe. The explorer followed the orders and sailed to the south 40th parallel. Let's see where that is. So, if that's 0, let's see where they have it. Okay, here's 15, 30. Oh, and actually I just saw that down here. This is the south. And if you guys can see this, it says this right here. Is the South Sandwich Islands. So maybe I was wrong. Okay. Yeah, maybe I was wrong about calling Hawaii the Sandwich Islands. Maybe I misread that. But no doubt, east of Cape Horn, pretty much in between Cape Horn of South America and Antarctica. And then, but anyways, and then it says he went down to the 40th parallel, which is roughly here, if you guys can see it. So, just below Cape Town, South Africa. And pretty much nowhere near the southernmost point of South America. But it's pretty much exactly where New Zealand is, so he had, from there, sailed west, circled New Zealand to prove that it wasn't connected to a larger continent like Australia, and proved it was just an independent binary chain of islands. So, but yeah, he never found that new continent that ended up being Antarctica. Antarctica. Interesting is the Endeavour apparently sank, almost sank, sorry, don't want to spread fake news. But yeah, the Endeavour almost sank on the Great Barrier Reef. Because he was in unmapped territory. He had no idea he was sailing directly into the razor-sharp coral formations of the Great Barrier Reef. His Endeavour slammed into the reef and began taking on water, endangering both his crew and the priceless charts of his South Pacific discoveries. Okay. And Cook's men frantically pumped out water out of the holds and threw cannons and equipment overboard to lighten their load. They even used an old sail to try to plug the hole in their hull. After more than 20 desperate hours, they finally stopped the leak and limped towards the Australian coast. It would take Cook nearly 2 months of repairs to make his ship seaworthy once again. Wow, that's actually pretty perilous right there. Cook helped pioneer methods for warding off scurvy. In the 18th century, the specter of scurvy, which is the lack of vitamin C, loomed over every long-distance sea voyage. Cook managed to keep all 3 of his expeditions nearly scurvy-free, though, and this was partially because his obsession with procuring fresh fruit or fresh food at each of his stops. But many have also credited his good fortune to the unlikely source of sauerkraut. He didn't know the cure or cause of scurvy, but he did know that the nutrient-rich pickled cabbage seemed to keep the disease at bay. So he brought several tons of it on his voyage. His only problem was getting the crew to eat it. To trick them, Cook simply had sauerkraut dressed every day for the officers' table. When the enlisted men saw their superiors eating it, they assumed it was a delicacy and requested some for themselves. Some more. And apparently now even Britain's enemies respected Cook. While Cook's journeys took place during a time when Britain was variously at war with the United States, Spain, and France as well, his reputation as a pioneering explorer allowed him to travel the seas with relative impunity. In 1772, a squadron of Spanish vessels briefly detained his ships only to release them after realizing Cook was in command. Not bad. Likewise, when Cook's third voyage set sail during the American Revolution, Benjamin Franklin wrote a memo to colonial ship captains instructing them to treat British vessels as common friends of mankind if they encountered them at sea. Next one is about finding the Northwest Passage, so I don't want to repeat anything I've said. So, Cook, 50 miles. Wow. So he penetrated so far west from the east side of North America through the Arctic above Canada that he apparently came within 50 miles of the western entrance to the passage. But his attempts to locate it were ultimately thwarted by freezing weather, violent currents, and heavy ice flows in the Bering Sea. When the extreme conditions drove his crew to the brink of mutiny, Cook reluctantly turned south for the summer. He never had a chance to resume his search. Okay, he suffered a grisly death. So this is a slightly different story, but pretty much the same. It says, while he docked for repairs in Hawaii in February of 1779, Cook became enraged after a group stole a cutter ship from one of his boats, the Discovery. He went ashore and tried to take King Kalinapua hostage, but the Hawaiians feared their leader would be killed and swarmed to his aid. When Cook's ship Discovery fired its cannons at another group of Hawaiians, Cook panicked and discharged his rifle before fleeing to a waiting boat. He didn't get far though before he was pelted with stones and struck by a club. A Hawaiian warrior then brandished a knife, a gift from Cook, that's ironic, and plunged it into his back. Cook fell into the surf and was repeatedly stabbed and bashed with rocks. After he perished, the Hawaiians ritualistically prepared his corpse as they would a king. They preserved his hands in sea salt, then roasted the rest of his body on a pit before cleaning his bones. Well, that's a pleasant point to end at, don't you think? I'm just out of material, so I'm actually gonna have to end it there. I hope you guys enjoyed this, though. I guess the birds kind of piped down. I thought they would be, I guess maybe it was feeding time when I started filming, so hopefully when they were chirping, squawking, they weren't too loud for you. And sounds like someone's backing up there, so I'm just gonna let you go. I'm just gonna thank you guys for watching, subscribing, liking, commenting, and just showing love for the channel. So yeah, this is it's a pleasure to be able to talk about this stuff and get supported while I do it. So you guys keep me going, and I can't thank you enough. I really can't. So I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Leave a comment. Let me know what you liked, what you didn't like, and I'll see you in the next video. Until next time, get some sleep. Sleep well.